Howdy all, grab yourselves a beer. It is time for some Path of Exile discussion. And today, in the third of my series on various skills that you could consider to use in the Flashback event that's coming up, the Synthesis Flashback event, I want to look at in-depth at the mechanics of Vaal Spark and have a look at how the skill works and how I would suggest building around it. This isn't a standard build like the other two so far in the series. It's not a complete build that you just copy yourself. It's a discussion of the various strengths and weaknesses of the skill, how it interacts with various Ascendancy classes, and how you might go about building a character based upon it. So, firstly, Vaal skills are Path of Exile's variation on big cooldowns from other games. If you played a game like World of Warcraft, you'd know that your character will have some ability that you can only use every 3 minutes, and it's some huge high impact ability that if you use it at the right time, it saves your ass, and if you don't use it at the right time, then you end up in a situation later where you're going, oh gee, I really wish I still had my shield wall, or whatever they call them now. The basic mechanics. Casting any Vaal skill inflicts a debuff called Soul Gain Prevention, and the skill itself has a massive effect, so that's a debuff on you. Instead of mana, these skills consume souls, and when you kill a monster, you gain a default of 1 soul, but 0 during the prevention debuff. That's why it's called Soul Gain Prevention. Now, there's 2 approaches you can take when building around any Vaal skill, so this works for all of them: Vaal Fireball, Vaal Spark, any of the others. You can either try to play around the drawback fairly and just endure the drawback and mostly use other skills, with the Vaal skill being a big moment. So you're running through a map, and then suddenly you're getting swarmed by enemies all around you. Something dangerous has happened. You need to react quickly. Boom, Vaal Righteous Fire or Vaal Discipline, and suddenly you've got a lot more power for a few seconds while you really badly need it. But it wouldn't be Path of Exile without a second option, and that second option is to try to cheat the drawback entirely. And that's what I'm going to be discussing here when we talk about Vaal Spark. Vaal Spark is the skill that people tend to use if they're looking to play a Vaal skill and really cheat the 2 drawbacks: the Soul Gain Prevention drawback and also the soul cost of the spell. So, I want to also provide a little bit of a warning. If you're a solo self-found player, sorry. Cheating the drawback is not for you. You can play a Spark build that uses Vaal Spark as a big cooldown, but you can't rely at all upon some of the things that are basically Trade League exclusive that you will need to use in order to abuse the drawback. For instance, I'm going to recommend using Bloodstained Fossils in the build, and as a way to craft weapons. I have never personally looted a Bloodstained Fossil. And I spent a fair amount of time in the Delve Mines, not a massive amount. So that should give you a sense that they're not common at all. You also can't count on getting a Soul Ripper or Soul Catcher flask, Soul Catcher being the one that you need to have for the build to function, and Soul Ripper being an optional, very expensive upgrade. But even in solo self-found, you may not even get the basic version. So let's talk quickly about the two various flasks that are important to abusing your Vaal skill. Firstly, Soul Catcher. I mentioned that there are 2 main drawbacks to Vaal skills. They require you to consume souls in order to cast them, and they inflict a debuff called Soul Gain Prevention. Vaal Spark itself has this little interesting line: modifiers to skill effect duration also apply to this skill's Soul Gain Prevention, which is a default of 6 seconds, but we're going to try and get that down. And Soul Catcher is a big part of that. Soul Catcher has the unique abilities: Vaal skills have 25% reduced soul cost during effect, and Vaal skills used during effect have minus 40% if you get a Divine Perfect one. Reduce Soul Gain Prevention duration. Do not skimp on this mod. It is better to spend an Exalt, even 2 Exalts, getting one that is 38, 39 or 40% here, rather than spending 6 Chaos on one that's only got 20%. Part of the reason for this is that we're going to be looking to scale this stat as high as possible. This 25% reduced soul cost effect, we're going to look to scale that as much as we can by using nodes on the passive tree that grant flask effectiveness, so increased effect of flasks on you. And as a side effect, we're also going to successfully scale this second mod. So, how do we go about getting these two drawbacks as close to zero as we can? Firstly, we have the Hazardous Research Cobalt Jewel. This is a Spark-specific jewel that you're going to want to use two of. You're limited to two of them. And it makes your Spark more potent, but also has a drawback of giving it up to 20% reduced Spark duration. Duration is really an important skill on Spark itself, less so on Vaal Spark. And this build, for Vaal Spark, you want to decrease duration where you can. We're not going to go as far as to use a less duration skill gem, but we are going to be looking to use 2 copies of Hazardous Research, ideally with minus 20% to Spark duration. This will then provide, because of Vaal Spark's modifiers of skill effect duration also apply to this skill's soul gain prevention, that reduces the soul gain prevention by 40%. Nextly, we have Soul Catcher, providing another 40%. But wait, we can get that 40% higher. How do we do that? Well, we go Pathfinder. The Pathfinder Ascendancy has a whole number of tricks that allow you to scale up flask effectiveness. There is the Alchemist cluster on the passive tree, which is close to the Witch starting area, which grants a massive 26% increased flask effect. Every single character that uses a Vaal skill will be using Soul Catcher and the 26% flask effectiveness from the Alchemist cluster. But then the minor Pathfinder nodes also grant 5% flask effectiveness, and they all stack. It's actually viable, although I don't advise this. It is viable to go as far as to not take 4 Pathfinder major nodes, but instead take 3 major and 5 minor nodes, which will give you 25% flask effectiveness. But you'll get 20% by taking 4. And because there are 4 very good choices within the Pathfinder Ascendancy, those are Nature's Adrenaline, Nature's Boon, Master Alchemist, and Veteran Bowyer, you're going to want to go with those 4, I believe, which then gives you 20% flask effectiveness. We're now up to 46% flask effectiveness, but there's more. The Conqueror's Potency Unique Jewel is the next trick that's in our bag of tricks here. 8% increased effective flasks on you. We're now up to 54. This is getting better, but we can do better. A belt can add an Elder Belt that is item level 81 or higher can roll 10% increased flask effectiveness. Alternately, Jun's crafts, so these are the veiled crafts, you can unlock expensive crafts. These cost an Exalted Orb to apply to a belt, but you can apply a craft that adds 8% to a flask effectiveness with no drawback, or 14% with a significant drawback of getting minus 33% flask charges. Now, using all of these, we can get a total flask effectiveness of 26 from the Alchemist cluster, 20 from the Pathfinder Ascendancy is 46, 8 from Conqueror's Potency is 54, and 14 from a Jun craft, or 10 from an Elder Belt, to either get us to 64 or 68% increased flask effectiveness. If we then have, let's say that we go with the 64%, that increases the 25% effect on Soul Catcher, that increases this to 41%. 41% reduced cost of Vaal skills in souls. We're now going to use the last piece of the puzzle, which is the very precious Bloodstained Fossil. Don't let the current prices in Synthesis Softcore fool you. You can see here it's 95 Chaos in Synthesis Softcore at the moment. This is an illusion. These will be much more expensive early in a league. When you apply one of these to a two-handed weapon, it will guarantee you, this is not a chance like a lot of the cheaper fossils are, it will guarantee you the unique mod that Vaal skills cost 40% less souls to use. Sorry, 40% reduced soul cost to use. If you put it on a one-handed weapon, you'll instead get 20%, which means that you'll need to use a one-handed weapon in each hand, and you'll need to use 2 Bloodstained Fossils to create your caster stat sticks in that case. With the 2 Bloodstained Fossils approach, you'll still get your 40%. So we have 20% reduced, 20% reduced, and 41% reduced. This is a massive 81% reduction in soul costs. Suddenly, it becomes very possible to save up enough that as long as our soul catcher flask is running, we can then fire off 5 shots of Vaal Spark pretty much in a row. You can actually push this higher to 6 if you really want to, but I think there's a considerable amount of opportunity cost necessary to get there. And I think 5 is the right balance. So ultimately what you want to get, 1 Bloodstained Fossil early on. This is the most important part, and use it on a bow. That bow will then have, that's what you'll use for a period of time, and it will give you 40% reduction on its own. Then you need to acquire the Soul Catcher Flask, and then scale it up via Flask Effectiveness. All of these effects will allow you to spam Vaal Spark in a way that feels really unfair. The other benefit, of course, to the Soul Catcher Flask is the reduced soul gain prevention. If we have 64% increased effective flasks, that will take a 35%. I'm just doing a couple of quick numbers in my head. And now let's say we'll start with a 40%. 40% plus 64% effectiveness will give you approximately 65% reduced soul gain prevention. We've already got another 40% here. So that actually gets us to the magic number of 0 soul gain prevention. That's incredible. That means that as soon as you fire off 1 Vaal Spark, it is able to kill monsters, and then the monsters, as they die, are immediately giving you Vaal Souls, which then fund the next Vaal Spark that you want to fire off. This makes the build hit a point where it is casting very powerful chain reactions. Vaal Spark hits everything around you and continues firing for a period of time. It's a really impressive spell, and this will allow you to really abuse it. So, I want to talk quickly about some other things that you will add onto this build. Firstly, there is the question of, do I want to go critical strikes or not? And this is a question just from having a quick scan through the various players that are running, that have had some success running Pathfinder Vaal Spark characters on PoE.Ninja. So PoE.Ninja, if you're not familiar with the site, it lists the top 15,000 players in the league by experience points, and also players that are tied with 15,000th by character level. Currently that is level 95 and up in softcore synthesis, and it will, or trade enabled softcore synthesis. It will then allow you to drill down, so you can filter it to show only characters who have a 5-link Vaal Spark and who are also Pathfinders. And you'll see there's only 34 of these characters in the league. It's not some super popular build, but it is potentially very powerful. And you can have a look and see what unique items are extremely popular. You'll see the Hazardous Research Gem, Hazardous Research Jewel, the Soul Catcher Unique Flask, Conqueror's Potency, all very popular. You'll also see Queen of the Forest is everywhere because it's really good for this build to move fast. Headhunter is very popular. Headhunter is one of the most powerful items in the game. It's also very expensive. The build works just fine without it, but it becomes truly ridiculous if you can get your hands on this. You'll also see Call of the Brotherhood, which I'll discuss a little bit later, because it is a really great option. That's the ring that converts a percentage of your lightning damage into cold damage. You'll notice that people are mostly using Vaal Spark here. There's a couple of builds that run some unusual things as well, like Temporal Chains. That really is an oddball. I'm not sure what they're doing there. But you'll see some people use Vaal Stormcall as well. The reason that they're using Vaal Stormcall is that Vaal Spark is a very, very weak build at killing tough bosses. When I'm talking tough, I'm not even talking as tough as the Shaper Guardians. I'm talking bosses like Azaro, bosses of tier 10, tier 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 maps. Vaal Spark is a trash destroyer. It moves at lightning speed throughout maps, killing everything in its path, and then running straight past the very tough individual monsters because you just don't have the damage for them. You'll notice that there's a large diversity in the various choices of skills and keystones that players have used. That's because there's a lot of ways you can build this character. You can have a look at the popularity by bringing up the passive tree heat map, and this will give you a sense of what other players that are experiencing success with the build have been doing. There's a few things, the darker the colours, the closer to red that they are, the more popular the choice is. The closer they are to cyan and blue, the less popular the choice. You'll notice that there's a number of things people are doing, like picking up jewels, but there's things like grabbing acrobatics and phase acrobatics are very popular. Also, a number of the very powerful nodes in the shadow area are popular as well. People path differently out of the opening area, and this build here would be an intelligence stacking build, which I'll come to in a sec. So, in terms of equipment you need to have to make the build work, as I said, you need to get your hands on a soul catcher flask as soon as possible, and you need to get one that is well divined. Don't worry so much about the damage roll. What you care about is the soul gain prevention duration decrease. You want that to be as high a number as possible. You'll want to get a bloodstained fossil used on a bow early on. Later in the league, you will want to get 2 shaper daggers, and it's my opinion, other people will have different ideas, that your whole of league goal should be to craft a good item using a bloodstained fossil and a hollow fossil and a glyphic fossil and a prismatic fossil on a shaper dagger. That's a very expensive setup. At the sort of prices I expect these items to settle at, a shaper dagger that's item level 85 or so will set you back 1 to 2 exalts just for the base. This is by the time the league has matured a bit, so a week or 2 in. A bloodstained fossil will probably be 2 to 3 exalts. A hollow fossil will be 2. A glyphic fossil will be 1. And a prismatic fossil will be crumbs, as will a prime resonator to use it. So you're talking a lot of expense here. But basically, this gives you everything you can want. You've got access to a small number of good caster mods because it's a shaper dagger. You've got the very powerful and very unusual glyphic fossil mods. These are any of the corrupt essences, and 3 of the 4 of them are exceptionally good. What you ideally want is the mod that grants you power, endurance, and frenzy charges when you kill a monster. That's the best option. But you don't have that much control over getting that. The other things you can get Your Hits Inflict Decay, which deals 500 chaos damage a second for, I believe it's 8 seconds. You can get Fireburst on hit, and you can get some little minions that hang around with you, and they're what you don't want to see. Your hollow fossil is because you're not going to be socketing anything of importance into the daggers themselves, and they will then be they will just be something that provides additional energy shield and additional damage. Lastly, the bloodstained fossil, of course, is the critical part. Your other option is to stick with the bows, and if you're going to go that way, I feel that you should aim to socket your Vaal Spark 6-link into your bow, and use a bloodstained fossil, an etheric fossil, which is a spellcaster one and has the mod has a chance to roll a mod. Socketed spell gems have 20% more spell damage, which is amazing. And a faceted fossil, which is the one that adds more skill gem levels to the socketed item. Faceted fossils are expensive as well, and they'll be in hot demand because other players will want them for other things. They're as rare as bloodstained fossils, so don't expect that to be a cheap craft to attempt. It may or may not be appropriate to add a sanctified fossil in there. I am not an expert, and there may be other fossils that are worth considering as well. So I'll leave that to further brainstorming in the comments below. Now, next things to say. I've already discussed that crit is an option with this build. I would opt to go for critical strikes, but feel free to make that decision yourself. It's a big decision. If you decide to go non-crit, you gain access to the very powerful Elemental Overload node. Elemental Overload is a node at this point on the passive tree that whenever you deal critical strikes, they deal normal damage, but they give you an 8-second buff that gives you 40% more elemental damage. So that's a very powerful option. Alternately, you can go crit and just get more damage on your critical strikes when they happen. I strongly recommend converting some of your damage into cold damage, or looking to add cold damage via other means, added cold damage support being one, and using Herald of Ice. Herald of Ice is enormously fun to use, and it's also very powerful at clearing up trash and just causing chain reactions that are so satisfying to use. The Herald of Ice to proc, you need to be freezing monsters. In order to freeze monsters, you need to be dealing quite a bit of cold damage. You'll see here that it's an almost universal call amongst the 34 players that are using Pathfinders with Vaal Spark in the current league. And so you'll see here that Herald of Ice is being used by 91% of those players, which, if my maths is correct, would be 31 out of 34. So that's a lot. You'll also notice a lot of people are using Grace. Grace is used because you will probably want to optimize your move speed, and nothing optimizes move speed quite like Queen of the Forest, especially on a Pathfinder. Queen of the Forest Pathfinders are extremely fast moving. You can pop a Jade Flask of reflexes to gain a tremendous boost to your evasion, which both makes monsters more struggle to hit you, and also gives you lightning fast movement speed. This gives you some defensive options. You can go move speed and life with Queen of the Forest. Or alternately, and something that I don't really see many people trying, but that I think has a lot of unexplored potential, is stacking intelligence and relying upon energy shield for defense. The reason that I think that this is worth considering is that its synthesis has a lot of options for intelligence stacking. Amulets can get one of plus 15% intelligence or plus 1% damage per 15 intelligence, and you can get both of those at once on an amulet with extraordinary luck. Weapons can get 1% damage per 16 intelligence on a one-hander, and that sort of synthesized dagger can then have all of the same crafts made on it that I was discussing before, with bloodstained fossils, with hollow fossils, with glyphic fossils, prismatic fossils. You can slam that onto a synthesized dagger instead of a shaper dagger and get access to lots of really amazing options there. Critical strikes and energy shield gear both benefit from intelligence stacking, and you would go about your intelligence stacking by, if we bring up the builds again, there is a specific item that they will use. Just having a quick look for it. There is a jewel that is used that converts all intelligence. It doesn't seem like anyone may be using it. In any case, as I say, it's a largely unexplored area. I think it has potential, but I'm not enough of a theory crafting expert to be certain that I'm right on that count. I could very well be wrong. It may be that by far the best bet is just to stick with Queen of the Forest and speed. But lots to explore there, lots of options. In terms of skill gem links, I want to suggest that you start with Vaal Spark, faster projectiles, increased critical strikes, controlled destruction, and pierce. That's 5 links that are the most popular by far. The 6th link is fairly flexible. You can use added lightning damage for more damage. You can use added cold damage if you aren't using any way of converting lightning damage into cold. So the Call of the Brotherhood unique ring, which is used by almost a majority of these builds, is one way of solving the question of how am I going to freeze enemies and shatter them so that my Herald of Ice can do its ridiculous dirty work. And you'll see that every single character that's using the combination of Call of the Brotherhood and is using a Pathfinder Vaal Sparker is using Herald of Ice. And alternately, yeah, you can say added lightning support, added cold support, increased critical multiplier is an option, empower support is an option. That I think empower works best if you're on an extremely high budget and you're using a 6-link bow with lots of plus skill gem levels on it. Lightning penetration, hypothermia can also be used. Of course, you can always start out this build with 5 links. The key thing that you need to get started is a bloodstained fossil, more than anything else. In terms of overwhelmingly popular uniques, I've already mentioned Queen of the Forest for speed and Headhunter if you can afford it. Lavinia's Spirit, the mana flask, is amazing for handling the drawback of Soul Catcher because it causes your skills to have no mana cost during the effect, but Soul Catcher has a very nasty little drawback. You cannot gain mana during its effect. Lavinia's Spirit will effectively negate that. You're still not gaining mana, but you don't really need to when your skills cost no mana to use. Magic Find uniques are also popular, and so you can use things like Sedima's Touch. You can use a very lucky belt, the Chain of Servitude belt that comes from the end boss of Incursion, and so there's lots of options that you can use there. Anyways, hopefully that's useful in terms of going through both an introduction to the mechanics of Vaal Spark and a few ideas that can help you decide if you want to play this build. Just one final warning before I close up, that this is not a build that is recommended for being your only character in a league, especially not if you want to kill bosses. This is absolutely a specialist character that is extraordinarily good at running through maps at lightning speed, collecting currency, getting those exalts rolling in, but it is not a build that is effective at killing the Shaper. It is not a build that will get Minotaur down if you've never done it before. And it is certainly not a build that I would take against Uber Elder, even if I knew the fight better than I do and was better at it than I am. So I'll leave it at that point. If you've got any questions, fire away below.